Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today to the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative's Country Index Release webinar. We're going to get started here in just a moment, but first a little bit of housekeeping. As you can see on your screen below the video, you should be able to fill in any sort of feedback, questions, or comments you have for us in the section provided below. We recommend that you add any of your comments throughout the presentation and wait to hit the submit button until the very end, and then that'll go ahead and get to our team, and we will be sure to respond to you within 24 hours. And so thank you again in joining our webinar today. My name is Megan Doherty, and I'm the Program Director for the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative, or MDGAIN, which is housed at the Notre Dame's Environmental Change Initiative. And I look forward to spending the next 30 minutes or so providing you with a presentation with a little background on our organization, as well as on our country index and our latest data release. So MDGAIN's mission is to enhance the world's understanding of adaptation through knowledge, products, and services that inform public and private actions and investment in vulnerable communities. Along with climate actors around the world, MDGAIN is working to avoid the preventable and manage the unavoidable in this new era of climate change. And so one way we do this is by maintaining and releasing our country index annually. The country index is the world's leading index showing which countries are best prepared to deal with global changes brought about by overcrowding, resource constraints, and climate disruption. It is a free and open source tool that aims to unlock global adaptation solutions in the corporate and development community, ultimately working to save lives and improve livelihoods while strengthening market and policy positions. And so in thinking really for the impetus for this work, or why MDGAIN has really focused its mission on the need for adaptation, we have several global efforts that really show the growing attention and need for adaptation. So for example, the World Economic Forum every year puts out a global risk report, and this is based on responses from hundreds of global leaders, primarily from the business realm, and it is looking to identify the top risks to the world in terms of both the likelihood of that risk and the impact. And as you can see here on your screen, the latest report from 2016 includes several risks that are directly related to climate change. And in fact, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation makes the top third risk in terms of likelihood and is number one in terms of impact. And so we're seeing now that experts are actually identifying climate change risks as bigger threats to the stability of the world when compared to some more traditional economic risks. So in addition, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is also highlighting this increased attention on adaptation. You can see here of the 17 goals, several of them are directly related to climate change, and we've actually highlighted some here that are directly related to the indicators from our country index framework. You can see goal number 13, taking, is all about climate action, and the text from that goal is specifically about taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And this goal explicitly lists that the strengthening of resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters as its first target. So this global effort was really solidified at the recent UNFCCC's Conference of the Parties, so that both COP21 last year in Paris and more recently this past fall, COP22 in Marrakesh, really emphasized the importance of country-level adaptation and also put a strong focus on advancing adaptation measurement standards, as well as innovation around adaptation finance. So here we've really work to highlight this global importance in showing this global movement momentum around climate change adaptation. And the way that we so often talk about mitigation is really a global effort. It is, of course, really great to have this global momentum around adaptation as well, but the impacts of adaptation are ultimately felt on the local level. And so, unfortunately, we are seeing more and more need for adaptation given the recent climatic changes felt throughout our communities all over the world. And so here you can see two examples from just this year. On the upper left-hand corner of your screen, a picture of flooding in China that occurred this summer, which according to the insurance company Munich Re cost about $20 billion in damages. And then on the lower right, Hurricane Matthew, which killed hundreds of people in Haiti and also produced about $10 billion in damages. So just this year, two events, two of many, unfortunately, that really devastated local communities. And we're seeing extreme weather events like bigger, more destructive hurricanes, hotter, longer droughts, and record-breaking wildfires, and floods are really occurring with more frequency and more intensity. And while this is true, the risk of these events occurring in certain communities, and then also your risk or your ability to cope with them, is something that we're seeing more and more is not really created equal. So on your screen here, you're seeing a visual put together by NDGAIN highlighting really the disproportionate risk of climate change. So the larger the circle here is indicating a higher level of vulnerability of a specific country, and those countries closer to the red coloration on your screen are those that are relatively less ready to actually deal with those climate impacts. And so as you dig into this and you're seeing which countries are the most vulnerable, we've calculated that people actually living in least developed countries have 10 times more chance of being affected by a climate disaster than those in wealthy countries each year. So there's a major difference in risk, and in addition, a difference in adaptive capacity. So our data is showing that it'll take more than 100 years for people living in lower income countries to reach the level of resilience those in upper income countries currently experience. And so this disproportionate risk, or this major gap between developing and higher income countries, is really exacerbated by the fact that the UNEP estimates that costs to adapt to climate change will be $150 to $300 billion a year through 2030. So again, really highlighting the need for mitigation as well as early and targeted investments in adaptation to bring these costs down. And so keeping this need in mind, the global momentum behind climate adaptation, in addition to these climate impacts being felt more and more, NDGAIN has really honed in on identifying places that are the most vulnerable to changing climate and identifying real-world solutions that can prevent changes from becoming full-scale disasters. And so this is also why, in line with our mission, we really work to keep our products free and open access so that we can distribute them widely. And so on that note, keeping everything open access also allows us to not only make tools that are geared towards a certain stakeholder. So we really try to make it usable to any decision maker that is working to enhance the resilience or adaptability of their community. So you can see here some examples of NDGAIN users coming from the private sector, public, nonprofit, academia, advocacy groups, as well as media and development organizations. And the example there on the right hand of your screen is from an organization called Eco Experts that recently used NDGAIN data to create this visual. And so what I'm really going to focus on here today is our country index, which, as I mentioned before, is really working to analyze the vulnerability of a country in terms of climate change, as well as how ready that country is to adapt. And so the vulnerability component of the framework is broken down into exposure, sensitivity, as well as adaptive capacity. And it's looking at 6 sectors, which you can see here on your screen. So water sector, food, health, infrastructure, ecosystems, and human habitat. In addition to analyzing how vulnerable a country is, we're also interested in looking at how ready that country is to accept adaptation investment. And so this is looking at those underlying structures that could help or hurt a country's adaptability. So economic characteristics, governance, as well as social. And so keeping these components together, we are able to get an overall snapshot of a country's adaptability, which you can see here. And so this is the latest data from NDGAIN's country index, and you can see here on your screen showing our country ranking. So every year this index is updated and kept freely available to anyone with an internet connection. It includes 2 decades of data for about 180 countries using around 50 indicators. In addition to what you see on your screen here, it offers innovative analytics to perform projected trends, what-if analysis, as well as some other types of analyses, which we'll talk a little bit more later on in the presentation. So today I'm going to share insights from NDGAIN's newest release. And while I do, I encourage you to split your screen. So go ahead and browse at index.gain.org, and you can take a tour yourself through the country index. Or if you keep looking at the example here on your screen, you'll see, first of all, these country rankings, so showing countries how ready they are, their overall adaptability to climate change, and these rankings change every year as we update the data. And then as you explore the rankings, you can also click on a particular country, and their country profile will pull up. So you can see here on your screen, Denmark is over on the right-hand side. And there you're going to get its overall ranking, its score, as well as how that country has been trending over the past couple of years. And then you can see below another graph showing the trend of score over time. And then if you were to click View Profile, you would get more information from that specific country. And so when thinking about trends over time, we took a look at the data this year to see which countries made the biggest moves in our overall ranking. So we showed which countries came from behind to make marked progress in their ability to withstand the shocks and stresses of climate change, and then also which ones got relatively less resilient. So as you can see here on your screen, countries in green are those that made the biggest amount of improvement in their preparedness over the last year. And so those were Ghana, Solomon Islands, Cape Verde, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. And then countries that showed the least amount of improvement included Bosnia and Herzegovina, Chile, Macedonia, Burundi, and Brazil. And so you see the individual countries are highlighted here as improvers or degraders, and that's on top of the coloration from red to green on your screen, which is representing their overall score to climate change. And so some countries can still be improving, but still be in this relatively worse position in terms of overall adaptation. So it's really important to look at the score of the specific country in a wider context. And so with that, here we have a helpful tool, the ENDGAIN country matrix. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a matrix which is shows the comparative ability of countries to undertake adaptive actions to increase their resilience to climate change. On the vertical axis, we are measuring the relative vulnerability of countries, and then the horizontal axis measures to what degree a country is prepared to deal with climate change. Divisions for the specific quadrants correspond to the median vulnerability and readiness of the world. And so here you can see countries that are in the red quadrant on the upper left are experiencing high vulnerability and low readiness, really meaning that they're having the greatest challenges as well as the greatest urgency to act. And then overall, countries want to be moving towards the green quadrant, where the readiness is high and vulnerability is low. So those countries would be relatively well positioned with few challenges. And so we're going to shift now to another screen. But before I do, just to show you, on the right-hand side, you can see the 5 countries that I just mentioned as the ones that improved the most in our newest data this year. You can see what quadrants they currently fall in. So Myanmar and Solomon Islands still in that high vulnerability, low readiness red quadrant, where Sri Lanka is just moving into the green. Ghana and Cape Verde in blue for now, so that makes them high vulnerability as well as high readiness. And so by using another one of ENDGAIN's tool, you can actually see how that has changed over time. And so here on our screen, if you were to go to our website and go to index.gain.org/matrix, you get this tool, and you can add the countries of interest here below. So I added our 5 biggest improvers for this year. And when you hit play, it's going to start back at 1996 and show how each of these countries have moved throughout the index from 1996 to 2015. So as you can see in the beginning, most of the countries started off in the red quadrant except for Sri Lanka. And slowly over time, they've all kind of moved to lower their vulnerability and increase their readiness. And while some, of course, moved a little bit in between, this is ultimately where they have ended up. And so this is a really helpful tool to see really what has happened over time, and then from there allow users to dig more into the data and try to ask research questions to understand why certain countries might have moved where they did. And so this year, looking at our most recent data, we of course found many factors that contributed to countries either improving or degrading throughout the rankings. but the data we're releasing today really highlighted that governance was an influential factor for countries in terms of improving their preparedness for climate change. So the biggest gainer countries, which we just highlighted on the previous slide, share improvements in common factors that contributed to their upward movement. Primarily, they're improving economies, improving adaptive capacity, such as access to resources, including reliable drinking water, agricultural capacity, as well as political stability. In addition, we're seeing throughout the index that political changes really bring opportunities for countries to improve on their overall stability of the country with regard to climate issues. So at a time when adaptation to climate change is really critical, this data is showing that policymakers are a key component to ensuring countries, both large and small, are prepared to face potentially devastating natural disasters. And so to really highlight this importance of governance and also just dig a little bit more into the functionality of the index, we're going to highlight two examples. So the first is one of our greatest improvers this year, Myanmar. You can see here that this year, Myanmar is ranking 159 on our index, which was a big jump from 178 in the previous year. See that overall, it is trending upward. It is still technically in that red quadrant, so still high vulnerability, relatively low readiness, but as we saw earlier, making gains to improve there. And part of the reason for its improvement throughout the index is due to readiness. So on the lower left hand of your screen, you can see a time series plot just of the readiness component for Myanmar. So starting at 1995, going through 2014 here, steadily increasing, and then around 2010, really dramatic increases in their readiness to accept adaptation investment. On the right hand of your screen, you can get down more into the indicator level and see what specific factors of readiness contributed to that overall upward movement. And so we're seeing increases in both economic and social readiness as well, and some pretty dramatic increases in governance. So really showing the influence that governance can have on overall adaptability of a country. And so this makes sense given that Myanmar saw sweeping political changes following decades of military rule and has also experienced constitutional reforms, elections, elimination of economic sanctions, and also expanded its information and communication technology infrastructure. So a lot of progress made on that front in Myanmar, which has really presented itself clearly in the data this year. Now, example from one of the degraders, so a country that fell in our rankings. Burundi here is ranked this year at 178. Last year, it was at 159, so slipped pretty dramatically in the rankings. Overall, Burundi, when looking at a longer time horizon, still trending upward. And so you can see in the quadrant, it is high vulnerability, low readiness, but has been, in the past couple of years at least, been trending up. And in addition to that, as you can see in the lower left, looking at the time series plot of vulnerability, their vulnerability has been steadily increasing, especially in recent years. And so given all this, the dip in the rankings was kind of surprising. And again, when we digged a little bit more down into the indicator level and did some more research, the data really showed several factors, of course, contributing to Burundi going down in our rankings, but governance, again, came out as a really influential factor. And so it really shows what a difference shocks to certain systems within a country can have on their ability to adapt to climate change. And so Burundi has suffered civil unrest, and a coup was actually announced just back in May 2015, so really highlighting that Burundi has become a very politically unstable country in this year, and again, showing up in the data in its relationship to being able to handle climate changes. So you've seen here now a couple of examples of visualizations that go along with the country index, and so I wanted to highlight just a few more. And so on the left hand of your screen, you have our spider plot visualization, which is showing specifically just the vulnerability section of the framework. Here we have a different grouping of countries, and so NDGAIN also looks at the biggest movers and degraders, the biggest improvers and degraders within the rankings over the past 5 years. And so when looking over a 5-year time horizon, the countries whose scores slipped the most during that period were Syria, Cuba, Spain, and Argentina. And so the left-hand visualization is including those countries. And what this graph is showing you is really the vulnerability of those countries in regard to specific sectors. So we're seeing higher scores, so higher vulnerability in food and water sectors for Syria, as well as higher vulnerability in the habitat and ecosystem sector for Cuba. And so this creates a nice visual to compare any countries that are of interest, and of course you can manipulate which sections of the framework you want represented here to answer your particular research policy questions. On the right-hand side, we have our time series plot. This is specifically looking at the governance section of the framework. The country groupings here are those that have made significant improvements over the 5-year period. And so these include Russia, Uzbekistan, Iran, and Rwanda. And here we're looking at, from year 1995 to 2014, their governance scores, which for many countries have been increasing, at least in recent years. And as you can see, Rwanda, which we actually highlighted for this very issue last year, really dramatically increasing in terms of its governance. And we also have seen that as really helping Rwanda move into that better quadrant and really move up the rankings of our overall index. And so we invite you to do your own comparisons using the country index visualization tools, and we provide these tools completely free of charge in hopes that they'll provide you with practical, customized products that you need. And so just a couple more examples here. These ones are available right on our website, and we also have some advanced tools which are still free. You just have to register for them, and then they become accessible to you. So you can go to our website and click Advanced Visualization Tools to access those. One of these is on the left hand of your screen. It's the Endgain Matrix, which is a visualization tool that allows users to explore and extract valuable insights from the time series progress of one or many nations over a 2-dimensional axis composed of readiness and vulnerability components or their indicators. So again, you could pick any component or specific indicator that is of interest to you, and then any grouping of countries that is of interest to you in order to compare and look for trends there over time. In addition, on the right hand of your screen, you've seen this before throughout the presentation, but we have our time series trends plot. And so this is looking at overall scores, and you can have the specific points, and then it just adds a trend line so you can see how countries have been progressing over a period of time. And not pictured here, we also have a what if tool, which allows a user to explore the Endgain score in hypothetical scenarios where a nation might have improved one or more of its indicators. So within this tool, a user can also apply weights to the indicators and specific sectors in order to determine how much weighting affects the overall Endgain score of their nations of interest. And so we've, Endgain researchers have recently used the what if tool to explore more how increasing adaptive capacity can better prevent crop damage in light of climate change to certain countries. And so by going in and manipulating the weights and values for different indicators, able to understand more the relationship between increased adaptive capacity and higher crop yields, even given climate change impacts on the ground. And so that's a few examples of our visualization tools, which again are all available on our website if you'd like to explore more. And just to briefly highlight some other areas of work here. So we are currently doing research at various scales. So I've just told you a bit about our country level analysis with our country index. We're also conducting research on the state level, particularly honing in at the intersection of conflict and climate change. And then in addition, down to the urban level. So we recently received funding from the Kresge Foundation to scale our urban adaptation assessment to over 250 cities throughout the US. So I'm very excited to gear up for that 2-year-long project. In addition, we have a couple streams of research that are more on the project level, for example, coming from monitoring and evaluation field, as well as a look specifically on drought and agriculture and its relationship with adaptive capacity, as well as on coastal resilience. So with that, I will go ahead and close and hope you get an opportunity to submit any comments or questions to us at the end of this presentation. We're really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on Endgain's Country Index release, and we hope that this knowledge will help you increase your adaptation actions. So go ahead to index.gain.org and check out the Country Index and our newest data. Thank you so much.